What if doubt isn't a weakness, but the most honest response to a suspicious story? Maybe it's time we challenge the idea that faith without evidence is somehow virtuous. Perhaps we should instead be making the case that Thomas's skepticism represents integrity, courage, and a refusal to accept claims that demand belief without accountability. Welcome to another bonus edition of the MTB Podcast, a segment of the weekly episode that I call Afterthoughts. This is my favorite part of these weekly presentations because it gives me a chance to dig a little deeper into something that came up during the main episode. Have you ever noticed how often doubt gets framed as a problem to fix instead of a signal to pay attention to? We're told that belief, especially confident, unquestioning belief, is a virtue. And if you hesitate, if you ask for evidence, if you say, I'm not sure I buy this, suddenly you're the difficult one, the outsider, the one who just needs more faith. But let's be honest. If someone today made an extraordinary claim and told you to just trust them without proof, would you do it? Or would you ask a few questions first? Because in every other part of life, that's exactly what we're taught to do. We teach our kids to think critically, to verify information, to be cautious about what they accept as true. And yet, when it comes to certain beliefs, that same instinct is treated like a flaw instead of a strength. Maybe the real question isn't why Thomas doubted. Maybe the better question is this: why didn't everyone else? So let's dive into that in this episode of Afterthoughts. Let me ask you this. What if we've been telling this story completely backward? Because for most of our lives, we've heard that doubting Thomas he's some sort of problem. It's the cautionary tale. He's the guy who just couldn't get with the program. But what if Thomas isn't the weak link? What if he's the only one in the room actually thinking clearly? Let's set the scene. You've got 10 people in a locked room. They're scared shitless, grieving, confused. Their leader has just been executed in a very brutal public way. Everything they thought was going to happen didn't. And suddenly, Jesus appears to them. The text says he showed them his hands and his side, and he gave them proof, according to the myth at least. So now they're all saying the same thing. He's back. He's back. Now, most sermons frame this as a moment of beautiful faith. The group believes. But then Thomas walks in, and he doesn't believe. He wants to see Jesus for himself. In other words, he wants exactly what the rest of them claimed to have been given: physical proof that Jesus was back. Now, think about it. All those people in that room, if they were given proof, then that's not faith. And for Thomas, that room didn't look like faith. It probably looked a lot like an echo chamber. 10 people standing around reinforcing the same extraordinary supernatural claim under extreme emotional distress the whole time. That's not reliable testimony. In fact, that's exactly the kind of environment where human perception tends to break down. So when Thomas walks in to find all of this, he says essentially, I'm not buying it. Not because he's stubborn, not because he's cynical, but because he's trying to stay grounded in reality. And here's the weirdest part. We've labeled him Doubting Thomas for what, 2,000 years? Why? Why isn't he evidence-based Thomas? Or why not, hey, how about we verify this, Thomas? It's probably because when it comes to a supernatural religion, there's something deeply uncomfortable about what Thomas represents. So when we want something to be true, we really want it to be true. Our brains are incredibly good at helping us believe that. Psychologists call this motivated reasoning. You and I call it wishful thinking. According to the story, the disciples weren't lying, but they were grieving. And grieving people are not the most reliable witnesses to anything, especially miracles. Thomas was right to ask for proof. Now imagine being Thomas in that moment. You walk into a room and 10 of your closest friends are basically saying, "This incredible thing happened. Our dead leader just appeared in the room with us and then disappeared again. We all saw it. It's real." And you say, "I don't believe you." That's not just disagreement at that point. It's also a hell of a lot of social friction. You would be risking your place in the group. Because here's the truth we don't talk about enough. Most people don't believe things because they're true. They believe things because their group believes those things. And if you've ever pushed back on a group belief, whether it's politics, religion, workplace culture, even family dynamics, if you've ever pushed back on that, you know exactly what happens next. The vibe changes. You're no longer on the team. You're being difficult or negative. You're just not getting it. Now, there's a famous set of experiments from the 1950s, Asch's conformity experiments. They showed people a simple visual test. One line compared to 3 others. The answer to the question given by the researchers was very obvious. But when everyone else in the room gave the wrong answer, most participants went along with it. They literally ignored the evidence of their own eyes so that they would fit in. That's how strong group pressure is. So Thomas, he's the outlier. He's the guy who says, "No, that line is not the same length as the other ones." 0% conformity. The facts is the facts. Now here's an uncomfortable question. If your community requires you to silence your own judgment, which is exactly what all conservative religions do, right? If your community requires you to silence your own judgment, is it actually a community or is it something else? Anyway, here's where Thomas gets even more interesting. He doesn't just say, "I need to see it." He says, "I need to touch it." That's a whole different level of proof because visuals can be misleading. And people hallucinate. They misinterpret things or unknowingly fill in the gaps with what they see with their eyes. But Thomas is saying, if this is real, it should hold up under contact with reality. If it's true, it should leave marks. That's a much more powerful standard. And honestly, it's a standard that we seem to be losing today. Because we're living in a world where what people claim as truth is increasingly untethered from reality. AI-generated images, deep fakes, viral misinformation, all these carefully curated narratives about everything. We see things constantly, but we're rarely willing or able to verify them. We don't ask, where are the scars? Where is the impact? Who is affected? Can I touch it? Thomas is demanding what we might call today receipts. He wants to see the receipts for himself. And there's that famous line later in the passage, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Oh, that quote gets used a lot. Usually as a compliment from religious leaders to people who just blindly accept what they're being fed. But let's pause and think about that. Because from a human perspective, that's a very dangerous idea. Believing without evidence isn't a virtue. It's a vulnerability. The basic assumption of all religions, belief without evidence, is also what drives Everything from tribal thinking to conspiracy theories. The bedrock, if you will, underneath all of them is the same. If anything, we should be saying the opposite. Blessed are those who ask questions. Blessed are those who verify. Blessed are those who don't outsource their thinking to someone else. Now, here's the twist. Thomas isn't rejecting the truth. He's protecting it. Because if something is actually real, actually meaningful, it should be able to withstand a little basic scrutiny. In a strange way, Thomas's doubt is an act of respect because he's saying, this matters too much for me to pretend to believe. Friends, that is what real integrity looks like. Not blind acceptance, but careful, honest evaluation. Think about every major shift in human history. Every time we've moved forward, science, human rights, justice, every time it started with someone refusing to simply go along. It started with someone saying, oh, wait a minute, I'm not convinced. Galileo questioning the structure of the universe. Darwin questioning the origin of life. Whistleblowers exposing corruption. Activists challenging systems that everyone else had just normalized. Those people weren't celebrated at first. In fact, they were isolated. They were mocked and even punished because truth tellers disrupt our comfort. And comfort is very, very hard for most people to give up. As far as I'm concerned, Thomas didn't ruin the moment. If anything, he tried to anchor it in reality. Coming from a mythological tale, that's a pretty good lesson. Without Thomas, this story is just a group reinforcing what they want to believe. With him, the story becomes something else entirely. The story becomes a test, maybe even a confrontation, because it demands that whatever is true must be real enough to stand up to scrutiny. And that matters even more for us today, because we are living in a time where truth is negotiable, identity is tribal, and belonging often comes with a price tag, agreement. And the question is, are you going to pay that price? Or are you willing to stand up like Thomas and say, I need to know that this is real, even if it costs you something? You know, in the story, the doors of the upper room were locked for fear of the authorities. But the minds of the disciples were locked for fear of the truth. Thomas, as far as I'm concerned, was the only one with the key. So maybe the real question for you this week is this. Where in your life are you nodding along with something you've never bothered to question just to keep the peace? And what would happen if you finally asked to see the scars? Thanks for joining me for this episode of Afterthoughts. Before I let you go, I want to remind you to head on over to thecodaproject.com to check out all of the content I'm working on. I'm trying very hard to build an online content ecosystem that's focused on values-based living. The Mythologizing the Bible content, which you're obviously familiar with, draws out secular humanist lessons from the weekly readings from the Roman Catholic Lectionary. If you like this content, then I'm sure you'd like my other content, which is designed to help you live a values-based life. The Weekly Compass is a tool to help you explore one core value at a time. And Kitchen Table Activism helps you put your core values into action politically, right from the comfort of your own home. You know, if people worried less about ideological divisions and focused more on ensuring their words and actions aligned with positive core values, our world would be a much, much better place for everyone. So make sure you check out thecodaproject.com and subscribe to be on my mailing list. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, remember to question everything, keep what's good, and live what matters.